So now what we're going to do is take a look at some number one seeds. We mentioned a couple of them, but now we're going to take a look at the graphic that shows us all of the number one seeds. And we've mentioned all of these. Actually, we've not mentioned Night of the Living Dead. We have mentioned the other three. What are your thoughts on Night of the Living Dead as the number one seed in the undead category?
We mentioned earlier the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is an innovator, but not an improver. Night of the Living Dead is top seeded in the undead category, I think, as a show of respect to the film, to the genre that it brought to the forefront. There's no Walking Dead without Night of the Living Dead. George Romero, up until his death, is he dead or is he undead? I don't remember.
Who knows? Who knows what his situation is right now? But
he was still making of the Dead movies. There's Land of the Dead. There's a closed circuit zombie film. So he continued to improve. And while others were making zombies faster, Romero was making them smarter. You could argue he's not the one to do that first. There are other films out there. But Night of the Living Dead, as the top seed in the undead category, it's going like Silence of the Lambs to have a very difficult road to the top, highly competitive brackets on that side.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that the way that this tournament is set up, these four number one seeds, we don't know yet who they'll be facing in the first round because there are 4 play-in games, one for each one of these divisions. So let's take a look at those play-in games and see what you think of those. Our graphics team is feverishly working.
They're doing great work, Vic. You got to pat the graphics people on the back. They're not slackers like the crack selection team. The graphics people know what they're doing. You can tell the graphics people got it going on, if you will.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. They know how to use a computer. Okay, here are the play-in games for each one of the divisions. The potential for facing The Exorcist in the Supernatural division, we have The Haunting from 1963 going head-to-head against 1999's The Blair Witch Project. Thoughts?
60s horror is a very difficult period. There's a lot of Poe adaptation, and it's very dry. Vincent Price chews scenery like no one else, so he makes it watchable. But 60s, late 50s, 60s horror is nothing compared to the actual horror that's going on across the country at the time. So it tends to pale in comparison with other eras. The Blair Witch Project, in particular, it redefined a genre by making use of the internet and viral marketing in a way that hadn't been seen before. So I think you have to recognize the Blair Witch Project, especially if you take into account the fan theory that there is no supernatural element and that the two guys are actually plotting to murder Heather, and the entire thing is them playing with her head.
Interesting theory. That sounds like an internet conspiracy in the making, or maybe it was made 20 years ago.
Blair Witch is deeper than you might think.
Okay, moving on to the creatures category. One of these two will face Alien, either The Descent from 2005 or Child's Play, the 1988 classic about the Devil Doll.
Now, see, this is the problem. I don't know that the Devil Doll works as a creature. It seems to be madness because he's a psycho killer. It seems to be supernatural because there's a possession involved. And it seems to be undead because it's after his execution. But as a creature, it seems Child's Play would be suited better to any other category. So I've got The Descent over Child's Play here, but it really doesn't matter because neither one of them can beat Alien, just like neither one in the supernatural category can knock off The Exorcist. They both fall to the number one seed.
Absolutely, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense because I think that the next category of madness might be the first one that you were talking about earlier, that there's a potential for an upset. So let's take a look at that. We've got Friday the 13th from 1980 against the 1959. You mentioned Vincent Price. He was in House of Wax.
You're absolutely right, Vic. On everything you just said, I agree with you. But it falls prey to that same 50s and 60s thing. House of Wax is a good example of horror, but the remake has Paris Hilton in it. Paris Hilton, talk about horror. There's an Achilles tendon cut. It's an early example of the torture porn genre that Hostel and Saw bring into the vogue. But House of Wax, 1959, I don't think it stands up to say to Friday the 13th. Sure, Friday the 13th was made by a porn director who was trying to make a buck, but it spawned a franchise that's made over 10 films plus a remake and is still might be going strong. Have you watched Camp Crystal Lake Memories? It's a documentary series. You can pick it up on either Shudder or YouTube.
I have not seen that. I'll have to check that one out.
It goes into deep analysis of each of the films in the series and really shows the cultural impact of Friday the 13th on the zeitgeist as a whole. For the enormity of the franchise, I've got to go with Friday the 13th. May I speak about the possible matchup with Silence of the Lambs at this point?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I think House of Wax falls to Silence of the Lambs, but as we noted earlier, Silence of the Lambs is a controversial pick because it's more of a suspense thriller, even though Hannibal Lecter is, by all intents and purposes and any definition, insane. But if you're looking a little further down the road, Silence of the Lambs and Friday the 13th is a very exciting matchup that either one could take thanks to the controversial segment. But if Friday the 13th gets past Silence of the Lambs, you're likely looking at a matchup with Halloween in the other side of that particular bracket. And I think we all want to see the Friday the 13th versus Halloween matchup. If we can't get Michael versus Jason on screen, we might as well get those two films facing off in a popularity bracket in a Facebook group on the internet.
Absolutely. That would be like a clash of the Slasher Titans, that film. Those two movies up against each other. Good call. Good call.
That could take us all the way back to Freddy versus Jason and where that franchise was supposed to go. By the way, Freddy versus Jason is dealt with in Camp Crystal Lake Memories. That's not the title. It's like Crystal Lake Memories, I think. I think I'm off by a word. But they talk about Freddy versus Jason and how the sequel was supposed to be Freddy versus Jason versus Ash and how they had trouble making that into a series because of how protective the different studios were of their properties. So we get to live out that little bit of fantasy in a potential Friday the 13th versus Halloween matchup in our bracket.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that potential matchup right there. Okay, and in the final category, we have, for the undead matchup, going against Night of the Living Dead, either Hellraiser or Sleepy Hollow. Thoughts on that one?
This matchup is a challenge. I read Legend of Sleepy Hollow recently by Washington Irving, and I had never read it before. I am embarrassed to admit, at my age, I just knew the story. Like
never too late.
Know the story. Like, you know the story of Jekyll and Hyde, and it seems rather ho-hum. But if you don't know the twist that they are, in fact, spoiler, the same person, the story just shock value hits you in the face. Sleepy Hollow, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, is not a horror story. There is no supernatural element. There is no undead creature. If you're inferring from the narrative, the entire thing is a prank on Ichabod Crane conducted by the fiance or the other beau of the woman that Ichabod Crane is courting. So Sleepy Hollow, in addition to being a somewhat lesser recognized film, isn't even true to the source material when it brings a supernatural element into the story. I think Hellraiser, however, is a classic of the genre. I think Hellraiser breezes past Sleepy Hollow. I think Hellraiser, and then that's an interesting matchup with Night of the Living Dead because you've got the... Look, Vic, people are going to vote on their own criteria. And some people are going to vote based on the quality of the film, the role of the film in history. Some people are going to vote based on the entertainment value of the film. And some people like Joe Bob Briggs will vote for whichever one has the most boobies in it. So I can't call Hellraiser versus Night of the Living Dead. I'd give it to Hellraiser on an edge, but I think Night of the Living Dead does so much for the genre that people may vote for it for its door-opening capabilities, just like we mentioned earlier.
Absolutely, absolutely. Night of the Living Dead could just be a sentimental favorite that goes through a couple of rounds.
It very much could. It very much could.
All right. Let's take a look now at some feature brackets. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through every single matchup, but we do have some feature brackets that our staff has put together, and wanted to discuss some of those with you, see if you have any thoughts on these.